copies, so just kind of one per couple, maybe. Just kind of, if anybody's interested. You're a couple of people, right?
It's going to be a while before we get to this handout, but we wanted you to be able to have it to look at instead of having to strain on the PowerPoint, because there's no way we get all the information on the screen at the right size. So we decided we'd give you something to look at.
Well, their screen's better than ours.
Uh-oh. There it comes. All right. I guess tonight it's my turn to introduce, right? So here we go.
Your turn.
So here we go. Last night we talked about a lot of things that were technical, a lot of things that were clinical in the introduction especially, because we wanted to get the information started for the week. By now you know, and you realize, of course, with the flyer and the things that we talked about last night, being you, us, family, and then ministry, that this is going to be a 4-layer study. And so that's the way we laid that out last night and the way that we're going to continue building on it tonight. But tonight's going to be a very specific thing, and it's going to be about couples. It's going to be about just two people. Last night we talked about what it meant to define the boundaries of who you are and what makes you distinct from me. Well, tonight we're going to take those same definitions and those same boundaries, and we're going to talk about what happens when we put that with another person. And when we put that with another person, and it's the opposite gender, because that's the way that God made us, Adam and Eve. And so when we talk about couples, that's what we're talking about. When we talk about husband and wife, that's exactly what we mean. So as we talk about this, the distinction that's going to happen for tonight as we talk about us is, how do we maintain a mental health as a couple? We have a couple of things on there. Can you flip us to that next slide?
I got it right here.
Oh, you got it. Oh, okay. You're the one sleeping.
Yeah, my bad.
Okay.
See, there's us.
There's us.
See, that's the review, and that's tonight.
There we go. So we're going to define our relationship. We wanted to say something up front that is understood. We want to make it very, very clear. Each circle represents a man and a woman, right? Coming together. And so the one thing that you need to understand is the third circle that you can't see, because God is so large. So we're talking about everything within the couple within God, everything in God, okay? So let's make that understood. Let's get that clear and get that out front. But as we talk about the identity between us, you may recognize, Gary made sure that we had different colors, because when we see this diagram, most of the time we don't even call it a Venn diagram. Even when I'm working with my clients, I don't call it a Venn diagram as much as I should. But we call it the MasterCard, because that's the symbol that you're used to seeing, and we're all accustomed to that. But if we look at this, this is what a healthy relationship looks like. This is what a healthy relationship with healthy boundaries is. So I want to use the colors that Gary has chosen for us here tonight to begin our thought processes as we talk about boundaries. As last year, we talked about what it was, the modern problems that were facing couples. And we used the acronym KIDS, if you will recall. Well, tonight, we're going to talk about the boundaries of that couple and the boundaries of that couple that make that couple healthy and strong. So if you will, bear with me as we're going to use a few hand shapes and hand signals to make our point and to illustrate us as we begin going. Because when we come into a marriage, and we have now defined ourself that we talked about last night with our boundaries, our woulds, our would nots, our wills and our will nots, and we come together as a couple. They come together, and as they join, those things, those components that we need to be sure we're aware of as a couple are as follows. Many of you were telling me you were taking notes. I mentioned that last night. So if you are taking notes, I want to give you a couple of pointers here. When you come into that, the identity that you bring into the marriage with the boundaries, it starts with your memories. All of your memories, each one of you, the husband and the wife, each one has their own memories of their own life. No matter what their age, they have individual memories. They have individual experiences. There's number two. They have those experiences in life that have made them learn, made them happy, made them celebrate, made them sad, made them feel all of the range of emotions of what it is to be a human being. And then they also bring in something that we may take for granted from time to time, and that is they bring together the boundaries of their own past relationships. And I'm not talking about past boyfriends and girlfriends. I'm talking about relationships that they have with anybody else that they come in contact with. So we have memories, we have experiences, we have relationships, and those past things that they've learned from either conflict or positive experiences, whichever way you want to look at that. And then number four that they bring in is from all of those, they bring in their values. Values is probably one of the toughest classes that I took. And when you think about values, I wonder what this crowd would label their values. Can you give me a value? Say again? Safety. Okay, there are certain things that we will not do. Some of us, when we come together, are daredevils, right? Some of us in here are daredevils. Some of us in here are not going to get too close to the side of the roof line because we're afraid of heights, right? So there's a difference there. So safety. And we're talking about emotional, not just those silly illustrations of mine, okay? What else? What other values? Trust. What am I going to trust? Am I going to trust? How far am I going to trust? Am I going to expose myself, or am I going to protect myself? Okay, well, I can see that. Anybody want to stab one more, or is that enough? Nobody else wants to be brave? I thought. Sorry? Honesty. Am I going to be direct, or am I going to be soft? Am I going to be clear, or am I going to be one that's going to muddy the water? It's a great question. So the values that we come together with are ours. Notice the color. There's green and then that red, okay? All right, so we have those boundaries that each individual comes into the marriage with. As we think about what it is for those boundaries, and then we have the center section there, you see this color because that's where they're joined. We know two things that are very bad shapes with marriage, with couples that come in. You ready? Here we go. I'm going to use just my hands. And so if we come in and we look like that, what's that called? That's called over-enmeshment. Okay? When you see that, you're either going to see one color, the green, or you're going to see the red, right? But the problem is, nobody knows which one's which because they're not just overlaced on top of one another. They're interlaced, and they're so covered, you can't see where one starts and the other one stops, and vice versa. And they've lost that boundary of that identity. Now, as we talked about last night, go ahead.
So, help me understand how, in what way that's a problem if two become one.
Two become one. We're supposed to, right?
Yeah.
So what is lost if we become one and we lose our boundaries? Loss of self. Okay? What's the problem with loss of self?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Is that the question we're going to face?
That's the question.
What's the problem with loss of self?
That's the question.
Y'all tell us. What's the problem if I lose myself? Loss of self, unhappiness.
You become too reliant on the other one.
Okay, you're so reliant on the other one because you lost how you define your boundaries and yourself. Okay? When we find two that attract, I'm going to answer your question. I'll get there in a minute.
Right. Well, I had a follow-up already.
I figured you would. What is it that attracts the red circle to the green circle and the green circle to the red circle? What makes them attract? Come on, we're adults. What makes them attract? Okay, compatibility. So, good answer. But what makes that compatibility? It's the boundaries and the definitions of our identity that make us see the other one that we would like to find out more. And then all of a sudden, we lose that boundary because we're like this. We're no longer ourself. Ourself is gone. What happens to that attraction? We change the other one. We think we want to change the other one, and we do, and all of a sudden, not only do we not like them, we're not attracted to them. What's your follow-up?
Well, I don't want to be married to me.
I don't want to be married to you either.
So I have to find a way to be me and her be her, but us be one at the same time.
Very good.
That's what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So if I have two, if I have the green and the red, if I'm just barely connected, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? If we had those two lines on, I need to point to y'all's screen instead of our screen. If we had those two lines barely touching, what's the problem? There's no strength anymore. That's right. There's no strength in that bond together. It's not something that's together. So there has to be something.
It lacks intimacy.
Okay.
Well.
There's no exchange of boundary. We're not talking about sexual intimacy. We're talking about intimacy of who we are with our boundaries and our identity that we started talking about last night. Now, as we proceed through this lesson tonight, and as we talk about some of these things, what is it about growth together? This is going to be a little touchy. Okay? So be careful with this one. What is it about growth together? With this slide's going to stay up the rest of our class. What is it about growth together that makes marriage touchy? Why is it difficult? So I don't see things like my wife sees them. Really? Really? You mean I knew she was strange. She's over here in case y'all are wondering. So as we think about this, so what is it within this thing that creates the problem with growth together today? This is where you had that wonderful...
Yeah, but you forgot something too,
Okay,
right?
okay.
You forgot to set this...
Did I skip it?
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
You forgot to set this in that biblical context, right? Which is, from the beginning, marriage was a man would leave father and mother, right? So he can't be enmeshed with his family.
That's correct.
He's got to define a self, right?
He has to leave and cleave, that's right.
And then he's got to cleave to her. Well, she has to be a self, right?
That's right.
As opposed to being fully enmeshed in her family and unable to differentiate who she is from her family, right?
That's
and
Genesis
so,
2:24.
So you have to have, so from the beginning, the whole idea is that you have a self and a self negotiating a relationship of one, like what we're talking about.
Oh, I like to negotiate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to make deals and negotiate.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
So,
You want me to negotiate my values?
well, you're talking about growing together.
You want me to negotiate the way that I see my relationships?
Well, she's growing.
How do I negotiate? How do I negotiate with my boundaries? Tell me about that. Here's the problem. And it's one of the things from this mind, okay? So that's dangerous when it comes from this mind. Y'all know that, right? So, what did you say about the age? You remember that?
Yeah, I did. I said that. So, I'm glad you set it up that way. One of the things that is happening in our current culture, in our current society, is that people are waiting longer to get married, and they're waiting longer to have kids. And there are a number of different reasons for that, right? For some people, it's the difficulty of finding somebody that shares the same values, or at least enough to overlap.
Back
right?
to that compatible word.
And I think a lot of Christians would express that, right?
Yes.
But then another thing is, well, the influence of feminism, and the idea that you should go to college and you should have a career, and see, the great thing is we've got the birth control pill and things like that, and so we have the option to delay having a family.
Okay.
But what that means is that through the developmental period of time where we are most forming our identity, which starts in adolescence and goes into early adulthood, into your early 20s, see, now we're getting past that period and on into our 30s before we are getting married and starting a family.
So that green and that red become
a little more, those boundaries are less flexible and negotiable, right? And it's even real sort of in a practical way, right? This one has built a life, this one has built a life, and now you got to blend the two together, even just bank accounts and where we, as opposed to, and I'm not saying that's wrong per se. I'm just saying it's different than the way it has been throughout the bulk of human history,
okay,
where during that period of developmental period of forming identity, people got married. And they went through the latter part of that period negotiating identity together.
They were adapting together. They were negotiating together with the world to become themselves, to identify and to label those boundaries.
Yeah.
So one more step, then here comes another problem in today's world, more and more. Now, nothing new under the sun, we know that. I think I read that somewhere. Maybe.
It's a wise man wrote that.
I think it was. And so the manner of coupling, think about that. The manner of coupling that's going on today. I think today it's shacking up. Isn't that what it's called?
No, that was the 90s.
Oh, that was the 90s?
It's
Am I
hookup
dating?
culture now.
Oh, it's hookup culture now. Okay. If you say so. And all of a sudden we find that that's who we're trying to blend our boundaries with, to join with. And as we couple then, and we know that doesn't last, we change as the seasons, and so we try different things, different times, and we don't know if we want to give in on this boundary or if we want to hold to that boundary, or even who we are, and our identity is lost. And we throw around this phrase too much. I want to find myself. I need to know who I am. In this setting, we need to be very clear about what the Scripture says. It is Genesis 2:24, danuk. It is to adhere and cling, to cleave. And when we talk about this word, and it's a great big long definition, especially in Aramaic, it talks about becoming one with that one to the point that, and let's use our own illustration today, that those things past are behind us, past. Because that's when we get into the dangers, and that's where we're going to spend the bulk of the time, or the rest of the evening tonight. When we think about then the dangers outside of God's plan of what it means to be together as a couple. All those things outside. What do I mean by outside? Let's get that out there. If you're outside the couple, what is that? Who is that? Come on, this ain't hard. Okay, third party. Who is that third party? Who do we allow to influence us that's that third party? You ready? Here it comes. 2 words, in-laws. What are y'all smiling about? Did you see all them smiles and eyebrows I got?
That's not the word they were going to use.
Is that well?
They were going to use outlaws.
Outlaws, I see, okay. So anybody that is not the pair. We have 2 people in Christ. We have 2 people. Anybody that's not in that 2, that number of 2 is out. Danger number 1. When it comes to the boundaries that you have and that your spouse has. 2, negotiating, in case you haven't caught on, that's our big word for tonight. Negotiating. Why do I need to also include others that are outside of that home? Do I? Do I need to include that? This is yes, this is no. Which one is the answer? No. I do not. So,
but don't they have some wisdom to offer?
Can they advise? Sure. Can they offer wisdom? Sure. Where does the problem happen? Where does that problem happen? Come on. Ooh. I love you, but it's none of your business. Is that what you're saying? I love you, but get out.
Barry just set a boundary.
He did set a boundary, didn't he? And there it is. Do we, as adults, recognize when our children set a boundary? Now I'm getting some more looks. Okay? Do we recognize when we set a boundary and our parents are out? I love you, but you're outside of that boundary. I've heard what you had to say. I have listened to it. You've taught me all of my life. I have to recognize that boundary. You know why? Because I have to enforce it. I have to keep mom and dad and mom and daddy-in-law out. Boy, they're grinning an awful lot back here. Yeah. I have to keep them out. If I want this to be the strength that I have that you spoke of a minute ago. Now, that's not being said facetiously. It's not being said with any anger or negative emotion, but it's being said as absolute truth, because when we worry about that, when we make the decision, what they're going to think, all of a sudden, this diagram is not just with 2 people involved in it. It's not just 2 circles. It becomes a conglomerate. Okay? When we used to be at camp, we used to make balls of bubble gum, right? And so if we're going to think about what everybody else thinks and we're going to worry about what everybody else thinks, that's what we're looking at our marriage, not this. Number 2.
Well, so what you're saying is that there's this tension, right, between individual or now between, so within the marriage, there's this tension between each individual to negotiate.
Inside.
But then together, there's a tension sort of with what's outside. Because leave doesn't mean cut off and never see again.
No, it does not.
Leave doesn't mean don't have a relationship with. But it does mean that the nature of that relationship is different. And the way we tell it's different is because of the boundaries.
The boundaries that are set.
Like we talked about the first night.
The very
Setting
first
boundaries defines
That's right.
me, and in this case, defines the marriage. So it also doesn't mean that I don't find a way to honor, right? So I maintain a relationship, and I honor my parents.
Yes.
But I have to set a boundary that defines this as something distinct.
Okay.
And
there's
different.
our word, distinct again.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go one more step. Now we dealt with what's outside. Now let's talk about the negotiation or the inflexibility of what's inside. Tell me about inflexibility. Give me something that's not flexible. At what speed? If we're going 100, that car becomes flexible.
See, he's flexible.
That's just about everything.
That's true, just about everything. But when we think about inflexibility together, the red and the green circle, now tell me what's inflexible. What's that mean? Memories, experiences, relationships, and values. Tell me what's inflexible. What's that mean? What am I talking about? I'm using big, long words. What's that mean? It means it's going to be my way or the highway. I've heard that all of my life, right? I don't care what you want. I'm going to do this. Is there any room for inflexibility when we come together and we are developing our identity with firm boundaries?
Well, here you are creating this tension again, right? Because
I never said it was going to be all roses.
Well, because last night we talked about boundaries, defining myself these are the things I will do, these are the things I won't do. And some of those things, to really clearly define who I am, I'm not flexible with. So you're saying, here's that tension again between what are the boundaries that are going to define me, but now what are the boundaries that are going to define us
together?
And those have to be negotiated between two people that have their own individual boundaries.
So when do we discuss those boundaries? When do we find out which one of those boundaries is going to be on the outside of the red and the green that are not flexible? How do we discover those things that are flexible for us to come together in that strength you spoke of? When is that supposed to happen? Before marriage. She says that with great angst. Did y'all hear the tone? I'm going to repeat your tone. You ready? Before marriage. That's what she said. Okay, yes. So what's going on in before marriage? What's that called? That time before marriage?
I think that's called premarital counseling.
I hope we do this before we get to premarital counseling. In dating, what are we doing? Are we just going out to get a Sonic and a movie? That's a cheap date now, isn't it?
No. Have you been to Sonic?
I haven't been to the movie either. So
you got to use the app and get the half price. It's a whole thing.
I just don't want to use the kiosk anymore. I'm not born for that.
Those don't work.
Those don't work either. So as we think about this, in the dating scene, in the time when we are negotiating this, there have to be things of me that will not bend, will not be flexible. If I am that flexible, I no longer become attractive to the other person that's attracted to me. Now, I got some looks now, not so many smiles, but some eyebrows. If I'm not me, if I'm not my identity, and I don't have my boundaries, that's who they were attracted to. If I allow outside influences, whatever they may be, or I allow myself, because I don't have a backbone to stand up for myself with the one person that I'm choosing on the planet to spend my life with, why would I change who I am when who I am is what attracted them in the first place?
Well, and that's exactly why I believe that so many marriages fail in our society, is because we're trying on a partner, right? We've lived together before we got married, right? And so then what is marriage anyway? Because we've already tried this, we've already been trying this or doing this.
The sacred nature is gone.
Or there's always the option of divorce if this doesn't work out.
The back door going in the front.
But neither one of those set up the kind of scenario that is necessary for two people who are distinct individuals to negotiate what you're talking about. Because negotiating what you're talking about requires two people latching themselves together and saying, we have to negotiate this because now we are together. There is no other option. And so I have to be completely vulnerable with you, and you have to be completely vulnerable with me. And you can't do that with somebody that you're not afraid, unless you are not afraid that they're gone the first time you show them the real you.
So I have to be honesty with my values when I'm negotiating. I have to be honest with this person about who I am and who I am not. Is that easy? This is yes, this is no. Is that easy? No.
But it's impossible if you don't know what those are. If you
Bingo.
don't know yourself,
If I don't know my boundaries,
you can't negotiate
I
those
don't know
with
how to
her.
negotiate. Now, on the page we just handed out, right? Did we have a slide for this, by the way?
Yeah, but I don't know if they can read it. That's why we did the little handout.
Okay, we'll go back to the diagram, and you can't read that. This is the value clarification sheet. If you go to marriage counseling, you're going to have some version of this. If the counselor's worth their salt, you're going to see this. So if you were to glance at this, you guys have them right there in front of you.
By the way, we can take a few extra minutes tonight.
Oh, we can? Okay. All right. I was rushing because I was panic mode.
No.
You could tell, huh? So as we think about this, look at this sheet, and you think about your value. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to pretend that, I didn't count these exactly, I should have. I want you to pretend that there are, let's just say, 30 on here. And if you were to put your number of priority on this line, okay, would your significant other that you are now married to, your spouse, would they have the same number on that word?
So I think it's helpful for us, and I think they already did that, but I want to make sure we're defining values properly, right, as you
Okay.
look at the list.
Okay.
Because I think you can look at this list and you can go, we're not so much talking about your morality and their morality.
Correct.
We're assuming that in general, we're on the same page with our values in terms of morality.
That was her word, right? The compatible word? Okay, all right.
And so there's this sense in which most all of us share very similar values, right? Very traditional values,
Sure.
Christian values, and that's the things that we have in common. But what we're talking about is when you go to rank which one of these things you prioritize above another, well, that's going to be different for every single one of us, right? And so it's not that I don't value that in terms of this is a moral and ethical right, but in my relationships, this is more important to me than this, right? And that's where our differences are within that bigger picture commonality.
This list kind of makes me nervous. Tracy's never seen this list before. Now, when we get home, guess what Kip's going to be filling out, right? She's never
Practice
seen
what you
this sheet of paper
preach.
before. So thanks a lot, brother. I got
Yeah.
that. So look at that and think about the way that this is bringing up the difficulty of what it means to keep your boundary as a couple and to keep this strength in the compatibility together in Christ. And look at what it means when we talk about these things that they were in the very beginning of our class last night, because we said that control is an illusion, right? Who can I control? Who can I control? Myself, me. I can control me.
And I think you pointed us to a Bible verse that even illustrates the challenge of that sometimes, right?
A little.
Yeah.
A little. When we look at the way that we want to control others, what does that do to this diagram? What does that do to this union? What does that do to this marriage? Let's be straight. If I'm trying to control that negotiation, is this going to be a strong union? No. It's going to be one over the other, right? One of us is going to lose our identity by our boundaries being crushed or ignored. It's healthy to keep those circles identifiable and make that union strong by the way that we come together as one. By the way, these colors are for illustration because this is the way that the union comes together as one. We're using the colors for this discussion, not for the way that we are one together. And as you look at these things, as you look at the way that these issues are, the illusion of control, how do you strive to keep control? Let's talk about some of the things that destroy the boundaries. How do you strive to keep control of your spouse? Number one, the most widely utilized, when somebody throws up a boundary, okay? In-laws, get ready. This one's going to hit us first. When we're in-laws and we're striving to control our son or daughter-in-law, the first thing we want to do is give them a guilt trip. Anybody ever heard of a guilt trip? Anybody ever played a guilt trip? Nobody? I'm the only one in the crowd. No hands have gone up, not a single one. I'm not going to ask for hands no more.
Well, you didn't ask for anybody ever received a guilt trip.
Oh, have you ever received a guilt trip? Oh, now everybody, they're victims now. I see. Okay, all right, I got you. When we think about this in the means, it's only a means of control from a position of weakness. Did you get that? A guilt trip is a means of striving for control from a position of weakness. Why? Because as the married couple with the boundaries, we enforce our own boundaries. You as a couple have to enforce your own boundaries and allow control to be within that very union. Number two, emotional outbursts, irrational outbursts. It's the same thing. It's the same attack of striving for control. And it's an attack on the boundary. What I will do, what I will not do. What I like and what I don't like. Not the things that have been negotiated, the things that define us as individuals. The things that define us and help us to be healthy and cope with the stressors of the world, especially the stressors that come into the marriage. Okay?
You mean when you pushed hard on my inflexible boundaries, I reacted emotionally?
Did you really?
I did.
What do we think about
I
that?
bit your head off.
Oh, did you really?
I did.
Wait a minute. Can we ask for that show of hands?
I
There's a
wouldn't do
back
that.
door, isn't there?
I wouldn't do that.
Nobody's ever bit anybody's head off in response, right? Or an emotional outburst or irrational statements. No, never. And nobody has ever utilized, and I know our time is going away real fast. Nobody has ever utilized the memory of the elephant, right? What is the memory of the elephant? Well, I got some guys that are laughing and some women that are mad. I just said elephant. The memory is all that I said.
Don't make eye contact.
Don't know I can look above, look
Yeah.
above. The guys are smiling real big. Never forget anything, does it? The elephant never forgets anything. And as soon as you mess up with that elephant,
That's not the way I would have worded that.
that not look? Don't you look over here? Look at these guys
Kip
over there.
Green,
They're laughing over here.
I
at
did
me.
not call anyone an elephant.
As you think about this, when we talk about boundaries and we talk about the way that we argue and the way that we have emotional responses, and yes, we're going to bite one another's head off. Yes, we're going to snap at one another. We all know that's life. Anybody that stood up here and told you that wasn't going to happen to be a liar. But as we think about the dangers that are involved, it is the boundary of ourself as we have defined it that is being challenged. So what am I saying? As a counselor, as a preacher, as a brother in Christ, we know what our values and boundaries are. Are they up for compromise? They should never be up for compromise. When we have the one that we've chosen, the one that has chosen us, we've chosen together, all of a sudden, we want to find that orange football in the middle. All of a sudden, we are looking for turning of the locks to where they fit. And we want to define those boundaries together. Now we're finding a strong, solid Christian union based where? What's the big circle that's all blue? Jesus. Founded in Jesus. That's where we find our strength and our boundaries for our own individual definition of self. I don't know how much time you want to go over.
Well, I was told that we can't cut them loose for a snack because there just was too much chaos for that last night.
They didn't behave right?
Well, I don't think it was them. I think it was all their kids. So,
okay.
You know, we've got another 10 minutes if you need
got
it.
10 minutes. Okay, here we go.
You can have a snack after we're done if you need that.
London, is he lying? He was checking on you, see there? All right, so now let's get personal. When we think about the boundaries, and we talk about the boundaries of the couple, those of you that have your Bibles with you, if you mark it or if you're taking notes, look at Song of Solomon. Yes, I said Song of Solomon. You know, everybody, we talk about Song of Solomon and nobody wants it to be in the Bible. Solomon had one of his wives. He had how many? 700 and 300 concubines. And he had one that was very, very special to him, and he was very, very special to her. And if you look at Song of Solomon, and it's in the 6th chapter, and I believe you'll find it in verse 3. And she says something here that is so warm and so kind and so loving and so devoted that we need to know this verse very, very clearly, because that's what we're talking about tonight with this diagram, with this understanding of our identity in Christ. She says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. Now, Song of Solomon talks about how that they are to enjoy one another. They talk about picking the lilies. They talk about enjoying the mountains. They talk about enjoying other things about one another, and of how that they are devoted one to the other. So let's get this out there. As New Testament Christians, we understand what 1 Corinthians chapter 7 says. We understand that we have duty one to the other. We understand that if we withhold ourselves from the other, that it is only to be with consent for a short period of time, that temptation enter not in. When we think about the way that this union occurs, and we think about the boundary here being that which we have chosen, that we want this person to be our person, then we can choose within that we know we are giving ourselves. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. And as we consider the way that the world is, and we talk about social media, and there's so many things. I know we're not going to cover that this week at all, but there are so many things from the social media that enter into these two people on the screen. Why? Do they care what's in your house? Do they care what you do other than they want to control you, to get something from you? When the person you have chosen has chosen you, and you want, or you're supposed to want something for them, and they're supposed to want something for you. And that something is everything. If you can say here, just like Song of Solomon, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. I want everything for them, and they want everything for me. All of a sudden, the red and the green circle become malleable together. And we find the way that over time, over influence, I think somebody used that word a minute ago, outside influences, and they enter into this, and they challenge the boundaries of each one, and they even challenge the boundary of this union, because they're not thinking about that this union is made in Christ. They're not thinking that this boundary is founded upon faith. They're not thinking about this boundary being founded on a goal of heaven bought by the blood of Christ. They're thinking everything but. And that's why that outside voice is always destroyed. Now, I use that very, very violent term, and I want to explain why. Sometimes people talk about that outside voice needs to be muted. Why does it even need to exist? Now, you want to hear advice, you want to hear words of wisdom. There's a place for that, right? But when there are those that are striving to influence what's going on in this orange football shape, when they're trying to influence what's going on inside your home, inside your relationship, inside of who you are as a Christian husband or a Christian wife, they don't need to be muted. They need to be destroyed. Because they're trying to destroy that.
Because that's the sacred intimacy that exists only between a man and a woman that become one.
That's the leave and cleave.
Yeah. So I'm just receiving word that that the snack has cleared out enough that we can allow them to go as long as they are back by 10 till.
Okay.
But you closed that out really well.
I'm done.
Yeah, great job. Thank you.
Thank you all.